What is it? Is it a girl show? No, though it presents, artistically to be sure, 500 of the most glamorous aquafemmes on which the eyes have ever feasted. Is it a water show? No, though it stars Johnny Tarzan Weissmuller, Eleanor Holm, and 100, count 'em, 100 beautiful aquabelles. What is it? It's Billy Rose's Aquacade, the newest thing in American entertainment. He'll tell your grandchildren about it someday.
Do these words ring a bell? Well, they should, if you were one of the tens of thousands of lucky Clevelanders who visited the Great Lakes Exposition of 1936 and 1937. The colorful description you just heard comes straight from an advertisement for Billy Rose's Aquacade. This star-studded water extravaganza was billed as a touch of Broadway on Lake Erie, and rightfully so, since it was put together by Broadway producer Billy Rose. So who were the glamorous aquabelles who wowed us with their water stunts? Well, one of them was a high school kid from Lakewood. Her name is Jane Thies.
We started out trying out at the Lakewood High School pool, you know. I didn't even know how to dive in the water. But I just wanted to do it, and I did it. We had a little dance routine we did on the stage, and then we would walk down in fours and go into the water and start doing all the designs. The whole stage moved back, see, and at the start of the show, it would be close up to where the people are sitting, and then it would move back, and we would just have that big space there to do the show. And it was the lake, and it was choppy sometimes. One night it was really choppy, and in fact, some of the men came out, you know, the directors and so forth. They were worried about some of us, you know, because it was pretty hard to swim. But we did it. The water was more or less closed off at where the bandstand was on one end, and they would throw barrels and barrels of chlorine. Of course, it was nice, but it was just a drop in the bucket. We used to go in groups, and we'd go over to the streets of the world and have some grapefruit wine sometimes. It was a wonderful time. It was like magic for me, you know. It was like you're going to Hollywood, you know.
Billy Rose's Aquacade was a big hit. And after the Great Lakes Exposition closed in 1937, the term Aquacade, which Rose had coined to mean water show, was even added to the dictionary.
But it was a wonderful experience, and I'm glad I did it. And I think about it a lot.
The sound of calliope music drifting through the air, the smell of fresh popcorn, the thrill of flying down that first big hill on the roller coaster. Remember when the perfect summer day consisted of hopping on the neighborhood streetcar and heading off to the amusement park?
Purita Springs Park brings a lot of memories. One of the things about that famous roller coaster was that one part of the coaster went down into the valley. And at night, when you took that ride, I don't think there's another ride anyplace that it's just like falling into an empty pit and you can't see the bottom. And I'll tell you, there's nothing scarier than that. So that was a good place to take a date because you always had her undivided attention after that.
Purita Springs Park overlooked the Rocky River Valley on the west side of town and was perhaps best known for its Cyclone roller coaster. The Cyclone was the highest and fastest coaster in Cleveland. Its death-defying drop into the valley wasn't for the faint of heart, but there were plenty of other tamer pleasures awaiting visitors to Purita Springs.
Sometimes on a Sunday, my father would buy a quarter Sunday pass, take me out to Purita Springs. Now, my parents were Depression people. I was born at the tail end, so money was still a little tight, and we'd get a quarter. And it was, what do I want to do with my quarter? I could ride the merry-go-round for a nickel, get a candy apple maybe for 15 cents, and then I still had a nickel for popcorn to go home.
Luna Park was another favorite destination for outings in the 1920s and 1930s. Sitting high on a hill out near East 110th Street, Luna Park boasted exotic architecture, along with its water rides, Ferris wheels, and roller coasters. There was even a photographer there who would take your picture and turn it into a postcard to send to your friends. Yes, Cleveland was home to several fantastic amusement parks. But the granddaddy of them all has to be Euclid Beach Park. Although the park closed on September 28, 1969, its memory has been kept alive by a loyal group of enthusiasts who call themselves the Euclid Beach Park Nuts. Every year, the Nuts gather together to display their memorabilia and share stories about what made Euclid Beach so special.
I think part of it was the fact that it was on the lake, and you could watch the beautiful sunsets, the smells of the popcorn balls, and the vinegar smells of the kisses being made, and the people. I mean, it was a place where you could sit down and you could see people moving about, and people weren't concerned about where their children were because it was a safe place to be.
My favorite ride was the Thriller. The front seat, chugging up to the top with your arms up in the air and dropping over that first big hill and screaming all the way down. And if you could do that, you were a champion.
The ride I think I enjoyed the most was the flying turns, even though I worked on racing coasters. But it gave you such a fantastic feeling of speed, even though it only traveled about 28 miles an hour. But being enclosed in a barrel really made you feel like you're doing about 90.
And of course the candy kisses and the Humphrey popcorn balls and the frozen custard, which to this day cannot be duplicated. Because Humphrey's had, I don't know, a special way of making that stuff. And everybody in their families would say, oh, look, we're going to get a frozen custard. And it was so inviting. It was so great just to think that they were going to get one of these ice cream cones with frozen custard in it.
It was a family affair because aunts and uncles and grandfathers and grandmothers could come out because they didn't pay anything. Now, what were they doing? Well, if Grandpa hated an amusement park, he could always go out on that wonderfully long pier and fish all day long. And if he brought his own bait, it didn't cost him a dime.
If there's one person who knows Euclid Beach Park better than anyone else, it's probably David Humphrey Scott. He's one of the founders of the Euclid Beach Park Nuts, and he literally grew up at Euclid Beach.
Well, my father was in charge of maintenance from the Humphrey operation 1901 until his death in 1938. I was very fortunate. I was born at the west end of the park, inside the confines, and I was a very spoiled childhood. I never bought a popcorn ball or a candy kiss, never paid to get on a ride either, so you know what a terrible childhood I had. There were about 40 families that lived in the park whose parents worked employees. And there were large families, so there were a lot of children. And we couldn't wait for you folks to go home because now we had the world's largest jungle gym. I'm riding roller coaster wagons and sleds down the flying turns, thinking nothing of it. We played hide and go seek and tag on these rides. I could cover the whole park, never put my feet on the ground. My favorite food, of course, was popcorn. Although in the early years they did have candy kisses, and the hot dogs were wonderful. As I got older, their coffee was specially brewed. The beans were picked and roasted just to the way the Humphreys wanted them. They went to a lot of care for a lot of things. People would drive out of their way for a cup of coffee. As a matter of fact, one of the funny stories is that the coffee was always served in heavy mugs, and people would love to collect them. But they would come out to the park, and they get one of these heavy mugs. Coffee was a nickel. And they get one of these heavy mugs, and oh boy, I'd like to have that at home. And they'd pick it up and they'd drink their coffee. Oh, this one's chipped. So, well, I'll buy a cup of coffee later. They'd go buy another cup of coffee later that afternoon and say, oh, this one's chipped too. So maybe they'd buy a third or fourth cup of coffee. Well, really, the fact was that when the Humphreys bought these mugs, they always opened the cases upside down, and a man stood there with a hammer knocking chips in the bottom of each cup.
Like all of us, David Humphrey Scott has vivid memories of this lady, Laughing Sam, whose boisterous giggles greeted visitors at the main entrance to the Euclid Beach Funhouse.
Laughing Sal was put in, and the laugh track was purchased by the Humphrey Company. And the reason I make the point purchased is because we have heard from two different sources that the laugh track for Laughing Sal was produced by getting an opera singer stone drunk and then telling her dirty stories. Now, that's not a Humphrey operation, so I point out that they bought the laugh track. It was either a love-hate relationship. You either loved the laugh or you just absolutely were bored out of your gourd with it. I still feel terrible that it had to close. And I'll be honest with you, it took me over 10 years to learn how to drive down Lakeshore Boulevard. I used to actually drive out of my way to avoid it if I was in that area, because it was my home.
Even though Euclid Beach closed in 1969, which is like 27 years ago, people that went to it, it was such a unique place, just can't get the memories of the park out of their minds. I know I can't.
You felt like you belonged to a family, and it was safe, and you were secure. And your mother always knew where you were. If you were at Euclid Beach, you were safe. And you still feel safe when you think about Euclid Beach. It just becomes a part of you, no matter how old you get. I have brothers and sisters all across the United States, and they still feel Euclid Beach. You just feel it in your heart. It's still alive. It's never died. It's never closed. It's open.
Looking back on the good old days, we remember so many things that just aren't around anymore. And sometimes the things we miss most are not places or events, but feelings and attitudes.
We did a lot of things with our parents. Our parents were our role models.
Mealtime, you sat down, whether your husband came home at 4 o'clock or 10 o'clock, you sat down and waited for Dad to come home and have dinner, and you had good conversation, and he knew what the children did all day, and we knew what he did. It was different.
Well, we certainly knew our neighbors because very few of us, even after we got up eligible for driving a car, had automobiles, so there wasn't that mobility. And second of all, we couldn't afford a car.
They were kinder times. People helped each other. Like, for instance, in my own neighborhood, I know very few people. I don't know if people migrate, but they were stable communities in those days. And you knew everybody. Everybody knew everybody's business. I don't know if people would like that today, but anyway, that's the way it was then.